All right, so we're going to start this new lecture series, and we're going to be talking about the integumentary system and largely talking about the skin and its different components. So before we get started, take a second and think about what you may already know about the skin. Think about the skin itself. Think about accessory structures, accessory organs that you can tie in and relate to the skin. When you think about those, we'll likely touch on some of those different structures and different topics as we work our way through this lecture. And so here you can see this is it's supposed to be a kind of funny picture, but what you have here is this is an actual specimen from the Body World Museum, and what you see in his hand, all of this is actually skin that belongs to this individual here. And so our skin is our largest organ in our body. And we know that an organ has to be made up of multiple types of tissues working together, and those tissues have to be made up of different types of cells. And that's exactly what we'll see. We'll see different cells working together to make different types of tissues. We'll see at least two types of tissues. And because of those numerous tissues, we have an organ here. So our skin is our largest organ, and we have the various accessory structures that we will associate with it. So we have different types of membranes that we can associate with our bodies. We have mucous membranes made up of different types of epithelial tissue, so things like lining our oral cavity, nasal cavity, respiratory, and digestive tract. We have serous membranes that line different internal organs, so things like the heart, things like the lungs, and the some of our abdominal viscera, and they secrete a serous fluid that helps to lubricate and decrease surface tension. We have synovial membranes lining joint cavities that secrete synovial fluid that again serve to lubricate and decrease friction in joints. And then the one we're going to focus on is a cutaneous membrane, which in this instance is going to be our skin. And we already talked about it being the largest organ in our body. And we'll have two sub layers or two subcomponents to our skin, the epidermis and the dermis. There will be a third part that we'll talk about called the hypodermis, or the subcutaneous layer, or sometimes called the superficial fascia. But it is not a part of our skin. It's not a part of the skin itself. It's a separate structure, a separate layer, but we will talk about it as well. And so some different functions of our skins that you may be familiar with. Obviously, we have it aid in protection. So we have it cushion different bony processes and things beneath the skin. It has a waterproofing nature to it, and we'll talk about keratin. We'll talk about our skin being keratinized. We have pigment-producing cells called melanocytes that produce melanin that can absorb and protect us from the harmful ultraviolet rays of the sun. We also have our skin function in a protective manner in an immune sense. And so our some layers of our skin, we have things called Langerhans cells or dendritic cells that participate in immune reactions. And we also just have the skin itself serving as a barrier. And so when you talk about the immune system, you talk about different first line defenses, and our skin is going to be our first line of defense and innate structure that we have that protects us against foreign organisms and infection. So you can imagine if your skin is intact, you are much better protected from invasions from microorganisms and viruses than you are if you had a large opening or a large wound in your skin. So it's very important to protect your skin so it can protect you. We have our skin function in body temperature regulation, and so various various portions of our skin will have blood vessels, and these blood vessels can undergo vasodilation and vasoconstriction to either increase surface area or decrease surface area. And you can imagine, if you will, for a second, if our vessels become larger with an increased surface area, that allows more area for our blood and blood vessels to dissipate heat and thus to help with our body temperature. And so we see this happening during times when our internal body temperature increases. And we can also have our sudoriferous glands or sweat glands begin to secrete sweat. And sweat is largely water based. It also has some salts in it. Um, as it comes over our skin, our hot skin, it will be whisked away, and with it, it will take heat as well, and we'll call that evaporative cooling. This process that as water evaporates, it takes with it um, highly energetic um, water molecules and is whisked that energy away to help decrease our body temperature. Now, we have our skin also function in sensation, so being able to detect stimuli around us. And we'll talk about different types of uh, mechanoreceptors. There's nociceptors that sense pain. Um, all of these are found in different parts of our skin. So some will be found at the border of the epidermis and dermis, so the epidermis dermal layer. Some will be located deeper within our dermis. Okay, and depending on where they're located, they detect different types of sensory stimuli. We have metabolic functions associated with our skin as well. So, vitamin D is synthesized um, in our skin whenever cholesterol it comes in contact with ultraviolet light, and we need the active form of vitamin D, which is sometimes called calcitriol. We need it for calcium absorption within our digestive tract. So we eat something. Whenever you eat something that contains calcium, it is um, you ingest it, you break it down, and this process of absorption within our small intestine, uh, a large part of it requires vitamin D, this calcitriol, to be present. If you are vitamin D deficient, you would likely have a calcium deficiency as well. And so this is why it is recommended to get your vitamin D, spend some time outside in the sun, because this ultraviolet light is going to convert the cholesterol that is found within your cell's plasma membrane to its active form in the liver, as well as partly in the kidney, where it can then aid in the absorption of calcium. Now, always keep in mind absorption occurs in the digestive tract and reabsorption will occur in the kidney. Okay, so absorption in the digestive tract, reabsorption within the kidney. We also have some excretory functions of our skin as well. And so different waste, ammonia, urea from the breakdown of proteins can be excreted through our skin as well. So when we take a look at our skin here, we said that we have two main layers. We have an epidermis and a dermis. And you can see on this little graph, this little schematic here to the right, we have an epidermal layer and then a much larger dermal layer. And then we have this third layer way down here. This is our hypodermis, sometimes called our subcutaneous layer, sometimes called our superficial fascia. And you can see all of this yellow material here. What do you think this yellow material is supposed to be indicative of? What is it representing? Well, hopefully you're saying maybe fat or adipose tissue, and that's exactly what we see. So we have this large layer of fat, of adipose tissue, existing beneath both our epidermis as well as our dermis. So we'll start first by talking about our epidermis and the different layers that we have that we can find here. So our epidermis is going to be our most superficial layer of our skin. Within it, we'll have 4 to 5 different layers depending on what type of skin we're talking about. And so we'll either talk about thin skin or we'll talk about thick skin. We have a stratified squamous epithelium that contains keratin. Sometimes you'll hear it called keratinized. Sometimes you'll hear the word cornified. Both of those are referring to the same thing. Okay. Within our epidermis itself, there is no blood, so there are no blood vessels, and there are no nerves. The nerves are located deeper within the epidermis dermal division, as well as deeper within the dermis. And then as we begin to create more cells that are contributing to our epidermis, they're pushing their way up through this sequence of cells that we'll see right here. And so from deep to superficial, so if you remember your directional planes, deep meaning further away from the surface and superficial meaning closer to the surface, we go stratum basal, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and stratum corneum. This lucidum, the stratum lucidum layer, this is the one that will be unique to thick skin only, and we will talk about where we find that thick skin. And so Again, epidermis is just one layer of our skin. It contains 4 to 5 sublayers, avascular with no nerve supply. So we'll stop there and we'll pick up with looking at our different epidermal layers in part two.